the European Union found itself in quite a severe energy crisis following Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. For decades, the bloc had relied heavily on Russian natural gas to power its homes and industries. This reliance created a dangerous vulnerability. When Moscow weaponized its energy exports, cutting supplies and causing prices to skyrocket, EU leaders knew they had to act quickly. They launched a frantic search for alternative suppliers to break free from the Kremlin's grip. This search led them to the shores of the Caspian Sea, specifically to Azerbaijan, a nation rich in fossil fuels and strategically positioned between Russia and the West. In July 2022, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen traveled to Baku to sign a crucial deal. She stood alongside Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev and declared him a reliable, trustworthy partner. The Memorandum of Understanding was ambitious. It aimed to double the amount of Azerbaijani gas flowing to Europe, from around 10 billion cubic meters per year to 20 billion cubic meters by 2027. This agreement was presented as a major step in the EU's Repower EU plan, a strategy designed to end the bloc's dependence on Russian energy. For Brussels, securing this new supply was not just an economic decision. It was a matter of geopolitical survival and solidarity with Ukraine. However, this partnership was immediately met with criticism. By turning to Azerbaijan, the EU was engaging with another authoritarian regime. President Aliyev has ruled the country with an iron fist for over 2 decades, inheriting the presidency from his father in 2003. His government has a long and well-documented history of suppressing dissent, jailing journalists, and silencing opposition voices. The decision to embrace Baku raised uncomfortable questions about the EU's commitment to its founding values of democracy and human rights. Was the bloc simply swapping one problematic energy supplier for another, repeating the very mistakes it had vowed to correct? The urgency of the situation seemed to override these concerns for many in Brussels. The immediate threat was a cold winter without sufficient gas, which could lead to economic collapse and social unrest across the continent. From this perspective, Azerbaijan was not just an option, it was a necessity. The country offered a ready-made pipeline connection and the promise of increased volumes. As the EU scrambled to fill its gas storage facilities and protect its citizens, the complex realities of Azerbaijan's political landscape were for a time pushed into the background. The focus was on securing the flow of energy, whatever the cost. The key to Europe's energy partnership with Azerbaijan is the Southern Gas Corridor. This massive 3,500-kilometer network of pipelines was a decade in the making, designed specifically to bring Caspian gas to European markets and diversify supplies away from Russia. The Southern Gas Corridor begins at the giant Shah Deniz gas field in the Caspian Sea, travels through Azerbaijan and Georgia, crosses Turkey via the Trans-Anatolian pipeline, and finally enters Europe through the Trans-Adriatic pipeline, which lands in Italy after traversing Greece and Albania. It represents a monumental feat of engineering and a significant geopolitical achievement for the EU. Since becoming fully operational at the end of 2020, the Southern Gas Corridor has become an increasingly important piece of Europe's energy infrastructure. While the volume of gas it carries is modest compared to the massive amounts once supplied by Russia, its strategic value is immense. In 2023, Azerbaijan delivered approximately 11.8 billion cubic meters of gas to the EU, which accounts for just over 4% of the bloc's total gas imports. For certain member states, however, this supply is critical. Bulgaria, for example, now receives up to 40% of its gas from Azerbaijan. For Italy and Greece, the share is around 15%. Since 2023, countries like Hungary, Romania and Slovenia have also started receiving Azerbaijani gas, further expanding its reach. Despite its importance, the plan to double gas exports to 20 billion cubic meters by 2027 faces significant hurdles. The primary challenge is production. Experts have raised doubts about whether Azerbaijan has enough gas reserves to meet this target on its own. The Shah Deniz field, the main source for the Southern Gas Corridor, is already producing near its capacity. To supply the additional 10 billion cubic meters, Azerbaijan will need to develop new gas fields, such as Absheron or ACG Deep. These projects require billions of dollars in new investment and will take years to come online. No final investment decisions have been made, casting a shadow over the feasibility of the EU's goal. Furthermore, expanding the pipeline's capacity also requires substantial financial commitment. The southern gas corridor infrastructure would need new compressor stations and other upgrades to handle the increased flow, with cost estimates running into the billions. European financial institutions are increasingly hesitant to fund long-term fossil fuel projects, especially as EU climate laws prohibit new gas contracts that extend beyond 2049. This creates a difficult situation where the EU's short-term energy needs clash with its long-term climate commitments, making it harder to secure the necessary funding to make the Southern Gas Corridor expansion a reality. The corridor is a vital lifeline, but one with clear and pressing limitations. A deeply troubling question hangs over the EU's gas deal with Azerbaijan. Is Baku helping Russia circumvent sanctions? Critics and energy analysts have pointed to a suspicious pattern. As Azerbaijan ramps up its gas exports to Europe, it has also started importing significant amounts of gas from Russia. In November 2022, just months after signing the deal with the EU, Azerbaijan's state energy company, SOCAR, signed an agreement with Russia's Gazprom to purchase up to 1 billion cubic meters of Russian gas. This has led to accusations that Azerbaijan is engaging in a form of gas laundering. The theory is straightforward. Azerbaijan may be using Russian gas to meet its own domestic demand. This in turn frees up more of its own Caspian gas to sell to the EU at higher prices. In a more direct scenario, some fear that Russian gas could be mixed with Azerbaijani gas and re-exported to Europe, effectively rebranding it as Azeri. If true, this would undermine the entire purpose of the EU's diversification strategy. The bloc would still be indirectly funding the Kremlin's war machine, just through a different route. The late academic Gubad Ibadoglu, who was later imprisoned in Azerbaijan, was one of the first to publish a detailed report on these allegations. Azerbaijani officials have strongly denied these claims. They described the gas deal with Gazprom as a temporary swap arrangement to optimize their infrastructure and manage seasonal demand peaks. The European Commission has been largely silent on the issue. Officially, Russian gas is not under EU sanctions, so member states are technically free to purchase it. However, the political goal of the Repower EU plan was to starve Moscow of energy revenues. The possibility that these revenues are now being funneled through Baku creates a major political embarrassment for Brussels and exposes a potential loophole in its strategy. The evidence remains circumstantial but compelling. In 2024, data showed that Azerbaijan was purchasing nearly $40 million worth of Russian crude oil each month, generating significant tax revenue for the Kremlin. For Ukraine, the idea of a gas swap involving Russia is a red line. A 2025 proposal to send Azerbaijani gas to Central Europe via Ukraine's transit pipelines came with the firm condition that no Russian gas would enter the system. The controversy highlights the complex and often murky nature of international energy markets, where flows can be easily rerouted and the true origin of molecules is difficult to trace, leaving the EU vulnerable to a strategy it sought to escape. The European Union prides itself on being a community of values, promoting democracy, the rule of law, and human rights. Its partnership with Azerbaijan, though, puts these principles to a severe test. The country is run by President Ilham Aliyev, one of Europe's longest-serving authoritarian leaders. Since taking power in 2003, he has systematically dismantled democratic institutions and crushed political opposition. The 2024 presidential election, which handed him a fifth term with a reported 92% of the vote, was widely condemned by international observers as neither free nor fair, with all credible opposition candidates barred from running. Since the EU deepened its energy ties with Baku, the human rights situation in Azerbaijan has deteriorated sharply. The government has launched a sweeping crackdown on anyone perceived as a critic. At least 21 journalists have been arrested and imprisoned on fabricated charges, effectively silencing the country's independent media. Civil society has been decimated, with activists and human rights defenders facing constant harassment, intimidation, and arrest. In a particularly chilling case in June 2025, peace activist Baruz Samadov was sentenced to 15 years in prison on charges of high treason, a move seen as a warning to others who dare to challenge the state narrative. The crackdown extends beyond its borders. In late 2023, Azerbaijan launched a military offensive in the long-disputed region of Nagorno-Karabakh. The campaign resulted in a swift victory, and led to the forced exodus of the entire ethnic Armenian population of over 100,000 people. This event, which many international bodies and observers have described as ethnic cleansing, triggered widespread condemnation. Yet the EU's response was muted. While the European Parliament called for sanctions against Baku, top EU officials have largely avoided public criticism of President Aliyev, choosing instead to focus on the strategic importance of the partnership. Baku has also become more hostile to international organizations. It has ordered the closure of the local offices of the United Nations, the International Committee of the Red Cross, and the BBC, further isolating the country from external scrutiny. When the EU's top diplomat, Kaja Kallas, visited Baku in April 2025, she emphasized the great potential for ties, barely mentioning the worsening human rights situation. An EU spokesperson insisted that the bloc raises these concerns at all levels, but critics argue that these private conversations have no impact. The EU's quiet diplomacy is seen by many as a green light for Aliyev to continue his repression without consequences. The EU's relationship with Azerbaijan is not just about gas, it is a complex geopolitical calculation. Brussels views Baku as a key partner in the South Caucasus, a region where Russia has traditionally held significant influence. By strengthening ties with Azerbaijan, the EU hopes to create a counterweight to Moscow's power and promote stability on its eastern flank. This strategy requires a delicate balancing act, as Azerbaijan itself maintains a complicated relationship with Russia, its powerful northern neighbor. While Baku and Moscow are economic partners, their political interests often diverge, creating both opportunities and risks for the West. President Aliyev has skillfully navigated this complex geopolitical landscape. On one hand, he has maintained a working relationship with Vladimir Putin. On the other, he has offered support for Ukraine's territorial integrity and provided significant humanitarian aid since the 2022 invasion. Tensions between Azerbaijan and Russia have also flared, most notably after a plane crash in December 2024 killed 38 Azerbaijanis. Baku reportedly suspected the plane was shot down by a Russian missile, highlighting the underlying mistrust between the two nations. This positioning allows Aliyev to present himself to the West as a bulwark against Russian expansionism, increasing his leverage in negotiations with the EU. Azerbaijan's global standing was further boosted when it hosted the COP29 climate summit in Baku in 2024. The event gave President Aliyev a major international platform, which he used to defend his country's role as a fossil fuel producer. He accused Western nations of hypocrisy for demanding his gas while simultaneously criticizing his environmental record. The summit was also marked by diplomatic tensions. France's climate envoy boycotted the event after Aliyev accused Paris of neo-colonialism and suppressing protests in its overseas territories. This assertive posture demonstrates Aliyev's growing confidence on the world stage, fueled by his country's energy wealth and strategic importance. This geopolitical context makes the EU's position even more difficult. Some officials in Brussels argue that engaging with Aliyev, despite his human rights record, is essential for regional security. They believe that pushing Azerbaijan away would only drive it closer to Russia or other actors, undermining the EU's strategic interests. Former Latvian diplomat Eldar Mammadov has argued that for the EU, the overriding goal of countering Russia has made Azerbaijan's domestic repression a non-issue. This pragmatic approach, however, comes at a high moral cost and risks alienating those who believe the EU should stand firm on its principles regardless of the geopolitical stakes. The European Union now stands at a moral crossroads, caught between its immediate need for energy security and its long-term commitment to democratic values. The partnership with Azerbaijan is a stark illustration of this dilemma. On one side, proponents argue that in a world of imperfect choices, the deal is a pragmatic necessity. It helps keep European homes warm, factories running, and reduces the continent's dangerous reliance on Russia. They maintain that engagement, even with difficult partners, is better than isolation, as it keeps lines of communication open and provides a foothold for Western influence in a critical region. On the other side, critics decry the partnership as a betrayal of the EU's core principles. They argue that by embracing President Aliyev's regime, Brussels is legitimizing authoritarianism and abandoning the brave journalists, activists, and citizens who are fighting for a more democratic future in Azerbaijan. This approach, they warn, is dangerously short-sighted. It sends a message to autocrats everywhere that human rights are negotiable and that Europe's values can be traded for barrels of oil and cubic meters of gas. The charge of hypocrisy is difficult to refute when the EU condemns repression in one country while signing lucrative deals with another. This dilemma risks becoming a recurring pattern in EU foreign policy. The urgent need to replace Russian energy has led the bloc to court other autocratic or problematic regimes across the globe. This strategy of diversification can easily become a race to the bottom, where strategic interests consistently trump ethical considerations. By focusing solely on securing resources, the EU risks repeating the same mistake it made with Russia, building a dependency on an unreliable partner whose political system is fundamentally at odds with its own. This could lead to future crises and further erode the EU's credibility as a global actor. Ultimately, the question is whether the EU can find a way to balance its pragmatic needs with its foundational principles. Can it secure its energy supply without sacrificing its soul? The path forward is fraught with difficulty. It requires a more robust and consistent foreign policy, one that uses the EU's economic leverage to push for genuine reforms, not just in private but in public. It also demands a faster transition to renewable energy to reduce reliance on fossil fuels altogether. Without a clear and principled strategy, the EU risks finding itself in a perpetual cycle of compromising its values for short-term security, only to face the consequences later.